The results that SLOG3 can produce are pretty incredible, but a lot of people avoid it because it can be intimidating with all the confusing information out there. Should you overexpose it by 0.3 or 1.7 or just expose it like normal? Let alone what to do with the footage once you actually get it into post. I've been there, I've got your back. If you're looking for a simple system to nail your videos using SLOG3, then this is the video for you. I actually hesitated to make this video for over a year because I wanted to test everything and make sure that these simple systems are fast and easy and produce repeatable results. But I knew I had to make this video because I think it's gonna help you all out a ton. And I also have to clear up some of my previous SLOG3 videos because I've simply just found better ways of doing things, which I'm going to share with all of you today. I imagine that a lot of people are curious about SLOG3 because they're getting one of the newer Sony cameras that has access to that beautiful 10-bit color where you can fully maximize SLOG3. Let me save you some time and frustration and help you make your videos look really good, really fast. 3 things we're going to cover. The first one is going to be all the in-camera settings that you're going to need. Quick note on SLOG2. This video is for SLOG3. If you don't have a camera that has access to 10-bit color, I don't recommend using SLOG3. I'd suggest you using SLOG2, and you can still get really good footage using SLOG2, but this video is going to be specifically geared to using SLOG3. The second thing is going to be exposure, which is probably one of the most important things to make any of your videos or photos look good, particularly with SLOG3 where it gets a little bit confusing. I'll clear all that up. And the third thing is going to be post-production, color grading, color correcting, anything you got to do in post to make your log footage actually look good. I'll be in Premiere today, but whatever editing software you're using, all the things we're going to talk about are going to work. But first, we need to clear up a few misconceptions and some just generally important things. A common misconception is that SLOG3 is tricky to work with in post. If we look at this clip of S-Cinetone, which is a picture profile that is sort of known to be good looking straight out of camera with not a lot of need to tweak it in post, next to this SLOG3 clip, and after just one click, that one is pretty much good to go. So if you look at these next to each other, the one on the left being the S-Cinetone clip and the one on the right being the SLOG3 clip, that literally took one click. And you can see the differences or lack thereof right there. So yeah, not all that intimidating to work with in post. Another, I'm not going to call it misconception, but kind of tricky topic is that you need to overexpose SLOG3 to a certain value. This is really technical, getting into some cinema stuff, and I think this part of having to overexpose it and then by how much you're supposed to overexpose it by, I think this is where a lot of people get confused and kind of get turned away from using SLOG3 in general. And at least for me, it created a lot of really inconsistent results. But I do what I do and I got kind of obsessed with it. And through my pain of learning all these different exposure methods with SLOG3 and what actually works, I think I've developed something that is going to be a lot more consistent and a lot easier to use. For example, here's a clip that's overexposed to the technical specifications for SLOG3 and then with some heavy adjustments in post to have it look somewhat normal, versus a clip using my system with just one click in post. You can be the judge, but I think one of those looks far better than the other one, and it's much easier. And lastly, this is simply what works well for me. So if you like the look of my videos on my YouTube channel, including this one, I'm going to show you the exact process that I do to get those SLOG3 clips looking the way that they do. There are a lot of ways to do this, and I've tried most of them with varying success. This is a system that has been very simple and produced repeatable results. And there very well could be a lot more technically sound ways of doing things, but if you try this, I bet you're going to like how good your footage looks. But let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are or any questions on some of those points. I'd be really curious to know. All right, as we get into some in-camera settings, the first thing you're going to want to make sure is that your camera is in manual mode. Now, depending on what camera you have, there's a few ways you can display SLOG3. They're both pretty quick, pretty simple, and relatively the same thing. The first way, in this newer Sony menu, if there's an older one, you can still find picture profile, but I'm on the fourth tab, the color and tone, and once we're in there, we're gonna just click on picture profile. Now, from there, you can pick any one of these containers. I'm just gonna use PP1. I'm just gonna change two things. We're gonna go to gamma, and with that gamma, we're going to select SLOG3, and then color mode is going to be S-Gamut3 Cine. Okay, just SLOG3 for the gamma, color mode at S-Gamut3 Cine. I don't change anything else. One thing that people will talk about is going to be detail, which is sharpness. I just leave mine at 0. There is an argument for bringing this really far down and then bringing sharpness up in post. I haven't noticed a huge difference between those two, and I think just leaving it at 0 works well for me. And then once I select, we're just going to turn picture profile 1 on, and then I'll just take this lens cap off. And now we are in SLOG3 using that picture profile 1 in this case, and we have a nice and flat picture profile. And one thing you can do in your display options, I'm just going to go over here to the toolbox here at the bottom, number 8 under display options. I'm just going to make sure my gamma assist type is set to auto, and then I'm going to go to gamma display assist. We're just gonna go ahead and turn that on. So that's with it off and that's with it on. And you can see by the icon up top that the assist to SLOG3 is on. That's just gonna add in, it's gonna just for the back of the camera, the screen display, it's just gonna show it in more of a converted to Rec 709 normal colors look. Although when you get it into post, it's still going to be flat. The assist tool is just for the back of the camera when you're looking at it to see what it's going to look like when you apply a conversion LUT in post. And then the other way is to enable log shooting, which you can do with some of the newer Sony cameras. To do that, I want to make sure that we're still in manual mode, and you also want to make sure that your picture profile is completely turned off. So make sure we have no picture profile turned on. And then after that, on this first tab here on number 1, we're just going to scroll down to log shooting. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. It's going to say flexible ISO. Don't worry about that. Just go ahead and turn your log shooting on. And then the color gamut between these two, similar to the picture profile for that color mode that we chose, we want to choose S-Gamut3 Cine for SLOG3. That S-Gamut3 Cine, we're going to see that a few more times in this video, so it's important that we select that one. Okay, and then from there, we're going to go back and just take a look at what it's looking like here, and we are officially recording in SLOG3, so not using the picture profile method here, just using the log shooting option. And you can see up top there that it's showing SLOG3 and the color profile looks nice and flat. Okay, so how do we get it to display something that's more normal looking and not showing this flat SLOG3 profile so that we can see something a bit more accurate? What we're gonna do, and this is one of the reasons why I like using this log shooting so much, we're gonna go back down here in this color and tone tab, or this exposure and color tab, and then down here, number 5, the color and tone. We're going to select LUT. Now in here, what we have the option to do is user-based LUTs. And you can see, I'll show you how I did that in a second, but now that I have that user 1 selected, which is a LUT that I did import into the camera, we get a view that looks a lot more normal. Now, what you have to do to actually like import LUTs, and I have a whole video that I'll put it up here. You can check that out if you want to completely understand every single step for using and importing LUTs into some of these newer Sony cameras. But in here, essentially what I did, and that's going to toggle across and you can see what it's saying, that very specific LUT is Sony's official SLOG3 S-Gamut3 Cine to SLOG3 to Rec 709 conversion LUT that I have, that I'll be using that LUT in post. It's also uploaded in the camera. So that in that slot there of user 1, when I go back here and look and you see up top where it says user 1, it's displaying SLOG3 converted over using Sony's official LUT, which is why I like shooting with that log shooting option so much, is because I have the flexibility to use the exact SLOG3 conversion LUT that I'll be using in post. So on the back of the camera, I get a pretty accurate representation of what the footage is going to look like once I convert it in post. keeping all of that in mind, okay, even like way back on like the picture profile in this the picture profile option, this log shooting option, the footage is still going to come out when you get it out of the camera and put it into post. It's still going to come out looking really flat and not looking converted, regardless of what we're doing on the back of the camera here for what we're actually looking at. So just keep that in mind, that these are all reference tools for the back of our camera to get a representation of what our footage is going to look like when we actually convert it in post. Okay, and then for our actual record settings, after we get the SLOG3 stuff turned on, I'm in this third tab, still number 1 file format. I choose to shoot in XAVC S 4K. XAVC HS is great and SI is great too. SI is essentially the highest quality. I think XAVC S works great. I mean, the SI is fantastic. It's high quality, but it's also massive file sizes, and I don't really see a huge difference between the two. HS is also great, although it kind of limits you on some of the frame rates that you can choose. HS is really good. It's kind of the combination between the two of high quality and also really low file sizes, but it is an H.265 file type, so make sure your computer can support H.265. If you like my YouTube videos and you like the quality, I shoot in XAVC S pretty much every single time. Okay, next under movie settings, I record in 30. I can see an argument for 24, but if you're slow motion, you might go in 60, or if your camera supports it, you might be in 120. And this is the big one. Make sure that you're recording in the highest numbers possible here. I choose for, and they're all going to be different. If you're in XAVC HS or SI, some of these are going to be different, but the big caveat here is that we're using 10-bit. If, again, I said this earlier, but if you're recording in SLOG3, it's because your camera supports these 10-bit options. If it doesn't support 10-bit, I don't recommend using SLOG3, and I'd suggest you using SLOG2. But we're going to be, for me, in 10-bit. So those are my exact settings. I'm in XAVC S, usually in 30p, unless I'm shooting slow motion. I'll be at a higher frame rate. My record setting is the highest megs possible in 422 10-bit. And this next piece is really important when we get into exposure. So I have a lot more extensive videos on all three of these topics, so this is just going to be a quick crash course. First thing we'll talk about is that shutter down below that's moving right now. It's at 1/60, which is where I want it. Because the codec that I'm recording in is going to be that 4K 30, most important part of that's that 30 part, the frames per second at 30p. I just want to make sure that my shutter is just going to double that. So for me, that's going to be 1/60. If I had something where I was recording, and let's just say I was recording in like 60 frames a second. So if I was recording in 60, I want to double that frame rate with my shutter. The closest I can get here is 1/125. So you're locking off your shutter to be double your frame rate, and the lower the shutter number, the brighter the image. Again, this is a big exposure thing. The higher the shutter, the darker the image. So we'll talk about that in a second. But if I was recording in 60 frames a second, I would be stuck at 1/125 for my shutter, and no other way to manipulate the exposure besides the next thing, which is going to be aperture. Aperture is the number that's moving down there, and that's just, it's a preference thing. It depends on how low your lens goes, I guess, too. But it's a preference thing on what kind of shot you want. How much blur or defocused areas in the foreground or background of the subject do you want? Typically for video, I'm around like 2.8. Depends. If it's low light, I might go a lot lower, but between 2.8 and f4, unless I'm outside and it's really bright and I want to show everything in focus, I'll crank that way up. But as you can see, the exposure is getting a lot darker. Let's just say I wanted this shot to be at f2.8. Now, if my shutter's locked off and I can't change this because it needs to be double the frame rate, if I can't change that to mess with exposure, and I want the shot to be at f2.8, so I can't change that to play with exposure, the only thing that I have left is going to be increasing the ISO or decreasing it to get my exposure. Now, we're going to go really deep on that in a second in terms of what to expose things to, but one thing you will notice in SLOG3 is that at some point, and for this camera, the number is 800, that's the base ISO for this camera. When I go below it, the ISO still works. We can still darken our image, but you get these two bars above and below the actual number. And that just means that you're using an ISO that is below the baseline ISO. What does that mean? It means you might not be maximizing the dynamic range of the image. A little secret on the channel, I shoot below the baseline ISO in SLOG3 pretty often. Don't notice a major quality loss, but technically, if you want to be perfectly technically sound to dynamic range, you wouldn't shoot in those lower ISOs that have the bars on them. But the big question is like, what do you even expose things to? And that's what we're about to get into in the next section. But first, if you're getting something from this video so far, this is important. Let me know by giving it a tap on the thumbs up to let me know to keep making videos just like this one. And if you've been looking for a resource that really helps that beginner camera user, whether it's photo or video, you probably just found it with this channel. You can subscribe down below. We'd love to have you a part of what we got going on here. Okay, exposure. There are a lot of tools that you can utilize on your camera to get proper exposure. Two really common ones are using the histogram or using the exposure meter. I've used both of those heavily and have found really inconsistent results with both of them and have a much better way. The histogram is this setting on your camera, and the problem with it is that it's measuring the entire frame as opposed to one specific subject of exposure. So a lot of the advice out there for SLOG3 is expose the data or the peaks, expose it to the right, and you should be good. It just lacks detail, and again, I haven't found the most consistent results using this method. Next is the exposure meter, likely the most common type of exposure when we think about SLOG3. A lot of the advice out there is if you're an SLOG3, just overexpose to 0.3 or 1.0 or 1.3 or 1.7 or 2.0. Like, this is the method that's being referenced when we talk about overexposing by a certain value. And this method didn't work for me at all. Similar to the histogram option, it's measuring the entire scene as opposed to one specific subject, and it just lacks detail, lacks precision. It's not my favorite. If only there was one method that produced repeatable results, and if you just took 5 minutes to really understand it and learn it, you'd have really consistent exposure using SLOG3. I said I had your back, right? Check this out. We are going to be exposing using a method called zebras. Don't worry, you don't have to have your computer. I'm just showing a chart here in a second that's going to help you out a ton. I'm going to teach this to you in layers, and it's all going to make sense. We're going to be referencing this chart for the next few minutes, and if you want your own copy along with a secret and pretty special, really effective tool on page 2. You want your own copy of this plus that page 2. You can check the link out down below. It's completely free. All right, we're going to start here. And I don't want to overthink this. I'll talk about this blurred out section shortly, and it's a really important section for SLOG3. But let's just understand this basic concept first. Don't worry about zebras. Don't worry about in-camera settings. Just this basic concept first. And that is simply that this zebra value here, it goes from 0 up to 100. This is what we expose things to. So there's some context here on the left. As an example, anything in a scene, whether it's photo, video, whatever, if it is at a value of 100, that is pure white, or it's the brightest highlight. It's not going to have any detail. Then let's slide down a little bit, something that has the value of 90 in any given frame. That is bright white, so it has slight detail in the highlights. And then let's just go down here to like the 40 through 70. These are the skin tone values, for example. And you can see we're not going to go line by line on this, but it gives you a value and exactly what the context of that value is. And it's going to cover 99% of anything that you're ever going to take a photo of or a video of. Okay, this skin tone one is pretty important because most times we're shooting the subject having a skin tone, so I want to make sure their exposure is right. So we have medium dark gray, black skin tones at 40, up to light gray or pale white skin tones at 70. That's just the zebra value, or the, not zebras yet, zebras soon. That's just the overall value of what we want to expose different skin tones to. We'll come back to that chart in just a second. Let's look in camera at how to even turn zebras on and how to set them, and then we'll link the two together. link it to SLOG3, and you'll have a whole new, really consistent exposure tool in your toolbox. So in camera, we're gonna wanna go to this menu option under the exposure tab and simply be able to turn zebras on. Toggling them on is gonna display them on the back of the camera. If yours aren't showing, it's because you don't have anything on the back of the camera that's bright enough to match whatever value that you have set. But first things first, just simply toggle them on. Next, let's set the values of the zebras. So if we go here, you can actually set in camera what value you want the zebras to be. Now, if you didn't have them showing on the back of your camera a second ago, just turn your zebra level really low and I bet you'll have them start to show up. But what I like to do instead of these default value settings is if I go down here to C1 or C2, it doesn't matter, and I change the type to lower limit, then on the right, I can change the value very precisely, which is going to be important for SLOG3. All right, so in camera, we have zebras turned on, and down in the custom, we've set it to lower limit, and we have the ability to change the value of those numbers. Back to the chart. This part's pretty simple because the zebra values that you're setting, they match the chart perfectly. So as an example, if you're setting your zebra value to 90, that's going to be the exact same thing as this chart at 90. If you're feeling confused, stay with me. So at this point, we've learned that there is numerical value of different things in a scene. We've also learned how to indicate on camera, turn on and adjust those exact same numbers on the back of our camera. And now I'm going to tell you how SLOG3 is going to change some of those values just by the nature and the makeup of the profile. And lastly, how to use zebras exactly to get exposure. Okay, so with SLOG3, let's unveil this blurred out section here. The method is still the same, okay? I just want you to think of it as just because the clipping points in SLOG3, how it's handling light, 94 is the same as 100, 85 is the same as 90, 75 is the same as 80. This is your big guide for SLOG3, these values. You want to completely neglect these ones here, these white values, and go with the orange ones when you're using SLOG3. For everything else, you could technically use these white ones, but SLOG3 is a little bit specific in how it's clipping and handling light. So everything I just taught you is exactly the same. The difference is there's no such thing as 100, for example. With SLOG3, it's going to clip out at 94. And for example, a middle gray average white skin tone, that would be 60 on a normal general exposure chart. That's going to be 56 for SLOG3. And here's how to actually use zebras then to get your exposure. Let's say that I had this shot where I knew that the brightest highlight, right, of the subject that I was taking a clip of, the brightest highlight, I knew that I wanted that to be 94 because back on the chart, that's going to be the brightest highlight. And in this case, that would represent a brightest highlight of the scene. So all that I would do is in the back of the camera, I would set my lower limit to 94. And then I would simply just increase my ISO. I know we've already talked about earlier with exposure when we're locking off our shutter and choosing the aperture we want. The only thing that we have to manipulate exposure in camera is going to be our ISO. You could also do this with your light source, but let's just stay in camera and say we're doing it with ISO. All we have left to introduce exposure or adjust exposure is going to be our ISO. So I've set it at 94 on my zebra level. I know that I want the brightest highlight of this clip to be at 94. So all that I'm going to do is increase my ISO until the zebras just barely start to appear on that exact spot in the frame. And I'm going to pull back the ISO by one little click, just one value. And that is going to be my exposure. And I know that it's right because the zebras are just indicators of a numerical value in the scene. They're just telling me that they're starting to show up on that part because it's at 94. And if I pull back by Just one click of ISO, it's probably exposing it either exactly at 94, at like 92 or 93, and it's damn close to really good exposure. And that is how I get exposure using SLOG3. Obviously, if you have a different subject, like a skin tone, for example, it's the same exact process, but you would just match the zebra value on the lower limit in camera to that skin tone and do the exact same thing of increasing the ISO until zebras just barely start to show up, and then pull back by just one click of ISO and your exposure is going to be dialed in. This method completely drops the notion of overexposing SLOG3, but I've also found that this delivers really desirable results that are really consistent and really fast once you understand all of those steps. All right, let's look at some stuff in post, and I'll talk about zebras again briefly in post. And as we get into post, I hope this is a moment for you that's not like underwhelming and a bit more like, oh, it's that easy. And it's like, yeah, when you get everything right up to this point, all the in-camera settings, all the exposure stuff, it really is this easy. I'll be doing this in Premiere, but you can do this in any editing software that supports LUTs, so pretty basic steps here. Okay, first thing, you're gonna go to this website. I'll link it down below to make it easier on you, but this is clearly Sony's official website. Just gonna scroll down here to Sony LUTs. It's going to take you down to Sony look profiles. Gets a little bit kind of confusing here in my opinion. They can make this way easier. Download Sony look profiles. We get to this page, and this is the file you're going to want to download. It's going to look really familiar. It's going to be this look profile for Resolve. Makes it sound like it only works for DaVinci. It works for Premiere, it works for Final Cut, it works for everything. S-Gamut 3 Cine to SLOG3. This is that official LUT that you saw me use in the back of the camera. It's the color space that we used in the picture profile option. If you didn't have the ability, like a newer camera, to record in log shooting into that option, this S-Gamut 3 Cine for SLOG3 is really important. We're going to go ahead and download that. All right, we've got that download. I'm going to go back into Premiere here. We have two clips that we're going to work with today, both of them recorded in SLOG3. I'll talk you through both of these things. But the first thing you're going to want to do, I'm on a Mac, but this process for PC is got to be close to the same thing, even though I suck at PCs. I don't really use them all that often. But we're going to go ahead, and on your Finder here, if you just go Command-N, you can make a new Finder window if that helps you at all. Helped me a ton when I was first learning these things. Anyways, from here, okay, what you can do, I'm just going to go into just a random tab that I have here. I'm about to store these LUT files from our downloads. In fact, let's just do that now. I'm going to go into downloads. Here's the zip file that we just downloaded. Let's unzip that, these Sony look profiles. Let's just put this, and I just have this video resources folder. Good organization goes a long way with all of these things, so you can always repeat your process. So if you leave things in downloads and then your hard drive fills up and you clear your downloads, guess what? Those things are gone. So separating this out goes a long way. One thing you can also do, I've just had this video resources folder that I just made in my computer. I just can drag that over to the sidebar here, and now this video resources, anytime I pull up Finder, it's simply just going to be, I'm going to put this in list view because I can't stand icon view. Well, second we open this up, it's just going to be right there, ready to go, nice and convenient. And here's the Sony look profiles here. Okay, we'll talk through these. So let's just go ahead and apply these LUTs. So I have the clip selected. It really is this easy. Okay, under basic correction for Premiere here, input LUT, that sounds like it's something we should do. I'm going to go to browse, and again, back on the importance of having these things stored and organized well. Here's the folder that we just created. Sony look profiles, the ones that we just downloaded. There's a few options here. I'll show you the one that I like, and it is, you got to read these pretty carefully because there's kind of a lot going on if you see like down here. This one is S-Gamut 3 Cine to Cine plus 709. This one is S-Gamut 3 SLOG3 to SLOG2 709. I don't like that. This is the one that I use. These first two are pretty good. I like this Type A one a lot. S-Gamut 3 Cine SLOG3 to LC 709 Type A. I'm going to go ahead and ready. We're going to click on that, and our footage is ready to go. Okay, no, like obviously you'd make some tiny tweaks here, but I do think it's important to get this across. Like that's how easy SLOG3 is to use. If you get it right in camera with your exposure and your settings of that S-Gamut 3 and you apply the correct conversion LUT, this is completely usable for me. Now, talking through exposure really quickly, one thing that I did do, just kind of thinking back to that whole zebra thing,
this little section here, these are going to be the brightest highlights. Let me just zoom in and I'll show you what I was thinking about when I was exposing this. Of this entire scene, this little area here is going to be the brightest highlights, like right off this microphone here on the left side. So I just literally put the in-camera zebras to 94, increase the exposures until zebras, just because I had a kick light over coming from this side that was really harsh and really bright, so I could get that kind of harsh highlights on that side look. All that I did was I put the camera zebras at 94, slowly brought up my ISO until zebras were just barely appearing over here, brought it back by one click, and that was my exposure, and that's what we're going to get, which is exposed near perfectly. Now, if you want to add a little extra sauce on this creative panel here, I already put these in here just to have a little bit of fun with y'all, but on my video resources, I have these brand new LUTs that I have out, some stylized LUTs. After you get your clip from SLOG3 converted over, these LUTs would go on top of that. This is the essential LUT. I use it in the studio all the time. It's very subtle. I actually usually kind of turn this one up a little bit, but let's turn that off, and that's just a straight SLOG3 conversion. Then my stylized LUT on top of it. It's flattening some things out and adding a bit more, kind of enhancing some of those blues, adding a bit more blues in the shadows too. But that's without it, and that's with it. And I use this essential LUT depending on the intensity on like all the clips in the studio. And with that new LUT pack, I'll put a link for that down below. It's 50% off right now, and I absolutely love them. You got to check them out. All right, next clip over here. This one is pretty straightforward. I'll talk through like what I did for exposure first. The first thing, let's convert it. Let's do our steps here, right? So all these crazy steps we have to do to convert this footage. There's my type A, and I'm done. It's a little purple. That's like a white balance thing, but generally speaking, that's pretty much done. So there's straight out of camera with log, and that's converted. We're good to go. But what I did for exposure is, because the skin tones here were so important to get right, is I just exposed this skin tone to 67. So same thing, back of the camera, put the zebra level at 67, adjusted the exposure until zebras were just barely showing up on the skin tone, backed off by one click of ISO, just one tap there, and that was my exposure. I think it turned out really well. This clip looks so good though. Back here on the creative panel, I'm gonna put my LUT that's pretty much designed for a clip like this. It's called Deception. Just gonna heat it up and add that really like desert feel to it. That clip looks so good on some landscape shots to get that really warm feel while maintaining the skin tones. I just love that one. But yeah, SLOG3 is extremely simple to work with. When in post, you just have that one click. As long as you get it right, you're good. When you combine all of what we ran through today with nailing your white balance in camera and then adding a little bit of extra spice on top of the clip with my brand new LUTs, your footage is gonna look good as f. Seriously though, this is gonna help you out a ton. If you don't like how your videos look, it's probably because of a white balance issue, and you're just absolutely gonna love those new LUTs. Significant discount code down below. Okay, bye.